Hello, everyone. My name is Shomo, and today I will be talking about a very interesting topic of data visualization. That is, how to do it well and how not to fall into common pitfalls of data visualization. I'll just quickly share some slides that I have. So, data science, as we heard from Neil and Carl Henrik also, data science can be thought of as visual debugging. And visualization is really a way to tell a story to different domain experts. And it's so easy to mislead with visualizations. I will show some case studies from examples and projects that I've done in the past and give you a sense of things that have gone well and things that have not gone well with visualization in sort of my work. And especially with a focus on doing it well, trying to tell a story, and trying not to deceive with visualizations. So Edward Tufte, who is one of the most foremost experts in data visualization, says this is the best statistical graphic ever made. So the year is 1812, June of 1812 to be precise. It's a warm summer day in France when Napoleon Bonaparte, the French emperor, decides to invade Russia. On the left-hand side, on the top left-hand side, the width of that grayish bar tells you the strength of his troops. So he starts off with about 800,000 troops. Paris is on the left-hand side. Moscow is on the right-hand side, on the top right-hand side. He starts off with 800,000 troops. And as you will see, as the troops march on, this is showing sort of the geographical space between Paris and Moscow, main rivers and things like that. As his troops march on, you can see that they're fighting against the Russian troops, and the width of that line sort of decreases over time. So the troops are dying off that grayish sort of bar. They finally reach Moscow in the winter of 1812 to find that the city is razed to the ground. It's completely destroyed. There's no food. And by this time, the bitter Russian winter has set in. Dejected, his troops now have to beat a hasty retreat, but now they have a nightmare on their hands. They are being pursued by Russian troops. They are fighting a rearguard action and fighting off Russian troops. They are also facing bitter, bitter cold. The scale on the bottom of this plot shows the temperature and how it's plummeting. I think right here it's down to about minus 26 degrees Celsius. You will see that this black bar, now this represents the retreat of the troops. The width of that bar now keeps on decreasing, especially more so near these river crossings. These are some major rivers. Along this, while trying to cross this river, you can see about half of the troops are lost right here. And the temperatures keep on plummeting. They keep on fighting. Finally, after a long, long time, they reach Paris. Initially, they started with about 800,000 troops. I think just probably 40,000 now make it back. You can see how the artist, and again, it's like art, how the artist has taken no less than 5 variables: the number of troops, the geography, so there's 2 dimensions of space. There is time as well, that's 4, and there's temperature, 5. So no less than 5 dimensions have been represented very, very succinctly to tell a story on just 2 dimensions of the plane. I do agree this is a very nice way to sort of do data storytelling. And again, across this lecture, I will try to distill some principles that Edward Tufte talks about in his book and draw on my own sort of personal experience as well. Looking at it more in the age of modern data science, the last few lectures have been on dimensionality reduction. You know broadly what that is. You take a number of features and you are trying to find a lower dimensional representation, a smaller code, if you will, that represents all the dynamics within that. t-SNE is a very popular visualization technique for looking at this reduced dimension space. So you can do it using an autoencoder. This could be an autoencoder, and you look at this sort of middle layer and you visualize it using t-SNE. Unfortunately, there are many, many pitfalls to visualizing data in this way. This particular paper, there's a playable notebook that you can play around with. This gives a very nice summary of this. What I can do is I can talk about a previous project. So a few years back, I was working with some clinicians and experimentalists. These were immunologists who were studying some cells in the blood that were involved in a particular disease. These are immune system cells. So what we did was we took blood from some patients. Each dot on this plot is a single cell, and each cell has between 10,000 to 20,000 genes. All of those have been sequenced. So you can take this massive high dimensional data, thousands of cells or hundreds of cells, thousands of genes within them, and project it into 2-dimensional space and see this using t-SNE. When I first showed this plot to immunologists, they got excited. They thought, well, this particular cluster is maybe a kind of cell that they know or they really like, and they got excited. But then next week, when I would just show them this plot would have changed, since t-SNE is stochastic. And it would really, really confuse them. And this is they ought to be confused because t-SNE is a stochastic algorithm. And sort of communicating that to stakeholders is really, very difficult. Also, distances are not preserved, and there are many, many pitfalls that I will talk about it. But visualizing high dimensional data is inherently very, very tricky, even with modern data science techniques. For example, as I said, distances are not preserved. Cluster sizes do not matter. Random does not always look random. And you think you can see some shapes, but because the mind sort of tricks you, you feel that this cluster is really far away from this, so there must be some meaning to that, but there really isn't. In particular, cluster sizes do not mean anything. So this is original data, the synthetic data that's been sampled and then visualized using t-SNE. Perplexity is one parameter that you sort of need to play around with. And as you play around with this, you see the sizes of these clusters keep on changing. So the sizes of the clusters do not mean anything. Unfortunately, the human eye really picks up these patterns and really sort of gets obsessed with that. So these visualizations can be misleading. There's again synthetic data that's been sampled and then visualized using t-SNE. You can see that in particular, let us look at the green cluster. As you visualize this using different perplexity values, the distances between these clusters keep on changing. Hence, distances do not mean anything. How do you communicate all of these to stakeholders who do not have machine learning experience? Well, that is the real challenge. You have to sort of communicate clearly with them and say that visualization ultimately is just a hypothesis generation tool. It's not the result itself. It's just a means to get to a result. It can tell you, well, maybe I need to do this experiment, or maybe I need to do something else. And really sort of focusing away, finding that gorilla in the room, if you will. Neil sometime back talked about this selective attention bias experiment, but we were so obsessed on finding out who is passing the ball that we forgot to see the gorilla. Visualization can be like that. You sort of need to steer the attention of whoever is seeing these plots away from all these distracting details to the core message. As I said, I mean, high dimensions are difficult to visualize. This is not unique to biological data. I mean, this problem has existed for a long time. For example, maps and globes. You want to express the three-dimensional nature of the Earth on two-dimensional paper. Turns out there are numerous ways to do that. There are numerous sort of ways to project that three-dimensional data onto two-dimensional space. And these comes with trade-offs. So for example, let us look at the maps that we are really sort of used to nowadays. This looks fine, but if you look at Antarctica, I mean, something is going wrong with sort of Antarctica and these projections. You can try to sort of fix it. So for example, this South Pole orthographic projection gives us a truer projection of Antarctica, but then it comes at the expense of the other continents, which are now like messed up. So there are always trade-offs. There are some bits of the globe that there isn't a single projection that can give you a global picture of what's going on in that 3D space. There are numerous ways to project that data. Can anyone guess what this projection is doing? Why does this map look so weird? Yes, there's a map in which the area is actually proportional to the population of a country. And you can see India and China look really, really big. You can sort of play around with this to, for example, one of my collaborators and a good friend did this work looking at vaccine inequality, where the area in this particular map has been made proportional to the number of vaccine doses. And you can easily see like countries like the US, UK, some of the Western European nations, Korea and Japan had way more vaccine doses than sort of other countries. There's a very easy way. These are called cartograms, and there's a very easy way you can do that. I've put a link in here. You can go to this link, and if you have any data, you can just upload it to that website, and it can help you generate these cartograms. I've talked about visualization, but visualization for like high dimensional data. Visualization can also be very important for diagnostics. So for example, this is the logistic regression model that Carl-Henric talked about last week. This is taking, again, the log odds ratio. These are the odds. This is the odds ratio, P over 1 minus P. And we take the log of that. That can be related in a linear way to your features. So you have beta 0 and beta 1 are your coefficients, and X is just some X is your data. So once you do this sort of transformation or this sort of link function, then you can relate it linearly to your data. One way to visualize this kind of logistic regression model is to look at these odds ratios. So a few years back, I did a project on mental health prediction. So we had huge amounts of data on patients, what kind of age they were in, whether they were sort of abusing drugs, what kind of medications they were on, what kind of disorders they had. And what we were trying to predict is whether they would die due to this disease within, say, the next 5 years or something like that. And so the log odds ratio, which is what this is showing, if it's positive, it says that, well, if your age is really high, then you have a higher chance of dying due to this. Naturally, that makes sense. If you're abusing drugs, then that's another risk factor. There's just visualizing these log odds ratios, and these bars are the confidence intervals. So if this line sort of crosses 0, so a log odds ratio of 0 is an odds ratio of 1. So if it crosses 1, then it's not significant. There are other sort of protective factors. So for example, if you are on this particular medication called SGA, or if you are on antidepressants, then these are protective factors. They help you sort of protect, they help protect against dying in the next 5 or 10 years. So there's a way to do, these are all visualizations for diagnostics. You can take it a step further and you can start talking, well, can you use heat maps? Heat maps are a very, very powerful technique to sort of convey a model to different audiences who do not have experience with machine learning. So for example, there's the same data. The rows in this heat map are patients. The columns are the different features. Instead of using a logistic regression model, we have just used a neural network now. This is the test data set. So the neural network makes a prediction of a probability that a patient will die or not die within that particular period. And what we are doing is, on that test data set, we are turning each feature on or off. So this is saying that if I take off family support, what does it do to that patient? It says that the patient now has a very high risk of dying in the next few years. And if I take a particular patient off antidepressants instead of being on it, what does that do? So this is just visualizing those probabilities, that change in probability from setting one feature to 1 versus 0, visualizing that in a heat map. And any clinician or any person who is not an expert in machine learning can immediately hone in to sort of really important features, like lack of family support just seems to be quite important. And it can also highlight like bias and things like that. But these kinds of heat maps are very sort of easy for non-machine learning experts to understand a model. Let us go back to linear models. This is the first thing that we spoke about last week. So for example, if you're fitting a linear model, here are some data points, and you're fitting a line through it. One thing that you always check is like, are the assumptions in your model very valid? Then one thing that we look at is the residuals. And the residuals are the distances from those data points to that line. So right here, those lines in red. What you always want to check is, are these residuals normally distributed? So for example, here is a plot of the residuals against the fitted values and how do they change. There's a very simple command in R. It's a one-line code in Python. And what you always want to do is check if these residuals are normally distributed. So here is a histogram of your residuals. These seems roughly normally distributed. You can also plot the quantiles of the residuals against some normal distribution and plot that. If those fall along this line, then it is then one of the assumptions of a linear model is indeed true, and you can use that linear model. Again, it's the QQ norm function in R. If you're using Python, here's a link to sort of Python code so to sort of do that. Again, very, very easy and simple visual diagnostics for your models. Ultimately, your residuals versus your fitted values should look like this hairy ball right here. It should be sort of clustered like this. It should not look like this. And it should not look like this, which is telling you that in higher fitted values, the residuals are sort of higher. If it is, then you need to transform your data or look at a different model. You have now heard and some experience with like generalized linear models. So you look at all those. You can transform your data. So for example, you can plot the logged sort of log of these variables. So for example, here's a plot of the log metabolic rate against the log of the body mass, and you regress that. But keep in mind that there's a transformation. There may be another model that you could look at. So for example, the residuals still need to be normally distributed after you do the log transformation. There may be other sort of regressions that we may be able to do, like GLMs or something like that. So think about what Carl Hendricks said last week about log transformation and picking a better model. Absence of influential data points. This is quite important. So for example, sometimes it's essential to remove any outliers before you do any downstream processing. So for the same sort of genomic data that I showed you some time back, we had this huge amounts of like genomic data, and then we did PCA. This is showing you the first 2 dimensions. And as soon as we plotted it, we could see this kind of outlier. Upon investigation, we found that it was sort of like a technical defect, and we sort of had to remove it. And it makes sense because downstream of this, we were going to use this data to like figure out which genes are important in disease versus control and use something like a t-test. If we had not removed this data, then that t-test would have picked up on this outlier, and that may have biased our sort of analysis. So we ran the analysis with and without this data point. And then we went into the data, figured out what was going on with this outlier. And then once we had sufficient justification for removing it, we removed this outlier data point. So really important to sort of visualize this data again. If this intrigues you, there is a GitHub repository that I have. You can look into sort of model diagnostics and linear mixed effects models, which is what these are called. It's in this GitHub repo. I've handed out some flyers as well. Please look at those. All the links to everything, these slides and the talk, are available on a GitHub repository. I'll put that in the video, and they're in the flyers as well. Time series data is sort of a different beast. So a few years back, I was doing a project in Australia where we're looking at trying to predict what the value of imports would be coming in through sort of Australian seaports. It was a forecasting problem, and we had sort of historical time series data on how much goods were sort of imported. So this is telling you, like, in Australian $1 billion, what's the import through all the seaports. And this is time on the x-axis. You can see that there is some seasonality. It's sort of, even within a year, there is like, it sort of picks up and then goes back down again, picks up. So maybe around Christmas, it sort of peaks. People are like importing a lot of goods from Europe and North America. And then after Christmas, there is a dip, picks up again around summer or something like that. So that's called seasonality. So just visualizing that data gives us that hint of, okay, now we need to build what's called a seasonal model. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. It's again a linear model where you're trying to predict what's going to happen next year based on values that you have seen in the past. It's called a seasonal auto correlational model. And that's a model that we ended up using. Visualization also pointed out some interesting facts about the data. Can anyone guess what's happening around 2008 or 2009? There's a massive dip in like value of imports right here. Yes, this is due to the global financial crisis. There was a massive external shock to the system. What this really meant was we had to fit a different kind of model post 2009 or 2010, because whatever model we had built till 2009 would not be able to predict afterwards. So we had to fit like a different model. And that's what an external shock does. Like visualizing this data told us that there was an external shock to the system. And whatever model we were using, those assumptions would not be valid after 2010. So we just could not use that same model. We had to use a different model. So again, visualizing your data would tell you that. There are numerous ways to sort of visualize time series data. Here is a way not to visualize time series data. So this is taken from Edward Tufte's book again. Link to that is in the GitHub repo in the flyers that I've given out. This is showing you required fuel economy standards of cars from 1978 to 1985. So 1985 is represented right here at the bottom of this road, if you will, and 1978 is in sort of the horizon. 27.5 miles per gallon in 1985 is 5.3 inches long. However, 1978, it was 18 miles per gallon. That's only 0.6 inches long. So it's just not proportional. And look at this funny sort of projection. It looks interesting, but really is what is called a design effect. Because even look at what the time axis is doing to it. Like the gap between years sort of gets smaller and smaller as you go far away into the horizon. This is what is called a design effect. This is not the effect of data. This is the effect of a designer who is designing something into the plot, and that deceives you. This is not a good way to sort of visualize time series data or any data. And I will tell you in the next slide what is the most principle, the foremost principle of data visualization. But how should we visualize this? Well, visualize it as just a simple chart like this. Time in sort of equal ticks on the x-axis and a single sort of data point along this. This is simple two-dimensional data, or probably even one-dimensional data. You can represent it in this way. No need for fancy graphics like that. And this design effect really leads to the first and foremost principle of visualization, that is the lie factor. The data is increasing by 53%, but somehow graphically you are showing it as an increase of 783%. Due to this sort of fancy effect of how this chart is compressing and sort of compressing this particular data point here versus this particular data point here. So the lie factor is 14%, 14. So you should always aim for a lie factor of 1, like show the exact amount of data increase that your data says. Your visualizations should not mislead, but tell you exactly what the data is saying. Aim for lie factor of 1. Again, a second principle is like if you visualize time series data, this is showing you the price in the barrel of light crude. There's a price increase here from $12.7 to $13.3, but how should we visualize that? Is it the length of this barrel? Is it the surface area? Is it the volume? There is no need to show like the barrel in there. It's just a single data point. Just show that data point. That's it. There's just, again, design effect. And the number of information carrying dimensions depicted should not exceed the number of dimensions of the data. So you're artificially introducing a second or third dimension in this data, when really it's just one-dimensional data or two-dimensional data. You're introducing a data around volume or area when there is no information related to that. This really goes into like occlusion and distortion with like modern data visualization techniques. It's very easy to show these kinds of fancy plots. For example, this is a really bad plot because is it showing an area or is it really a volume? Because you can also interpret it as a volume. And then it's also occluding or hiding the plot behind that. This again, design effect. And distortion. I mean, here, if you are showing area, I can also think about this as like the volume or the volume of this complex space. It's just distorting the data and introducing another dimension when there isn't any. Another good way to visualize time series data is what Tufte calls slope graphs. So here it's showing the percentage of GDP of different countries that are received by the government from 1970 to 1979. So Sweden gets about 46.9% of GDP. In year 1979, it goes up to 57.4. In Netherlands, it's 44%, goes up to 55.8. In Britain, it's 40%, goes down to 39. You can quickly, like, this viewing architecture really guides the viewer and tells exactly what's going on with like this particular number. Again, this is time series data. It's showing a number and it's showing time, but these arrows really sort of elegantly guide your eye and allow you to tell a story. And the story might be, well, why is Britain's percentage going down during this period? So these are very, very good ways to represent time series data. I've left some links here to do that very well in R and Python. Again, links are in that GitHub repo and the slides are on that GitHub repo. So take your time to go through that. Some nice way of visualizing and sort of communicating these to sort of different stakeholders is to make interactive applications. R has a very nice way of doing it using Shiny. Here are some examples from my own past work. You can also use D3.js to build these. And closely related to that is building, I think, reproducible sort of pipelines and reproducible notebooks that you can share with stakeholders. Again, our GitHub repository for doing that is right here. So very quickly, like, visualization is important for diagnostics and hopefully for picking models as well. It can be used for storytelling and communication, and visualization is just done like throughout the data science pipeline, not just at the end. And it's really just done well. It allows you to communicate really, really well with people and make it a much more pleasant experience. If there's one thing that I would like all of you to sort of take out of this class is show the effect of the data. Aim for a lie factor of 1. So in the next few minutes, I'll just take a few minutes to sort of go through some examples. So here is the revenue of Coca-Cola over time in billions of dollars. Can anyone suggest why there is a big increase from 2010 to 2011? So for example, right here. Yes, actually, there's a big way to sort of mislead people. The bar chart actually does not start at 0. So if it does start at 0, the effect does not seem that big now. The bar chart was starting at 28. Instead, if it starts at 0, you can see the effect is not that pronounced. Again, a very good way to sort of mislead people. What is going on with this particular map right here? So I'll just let you read this particular map. I'll just guide maybe some readers. So instinctively, the human eye tends to correlate darker colors with more sort of infection rate. There's looking at the reported cases. So for example, maybe black is sort of more infection, red is less, and that makes sense. But again, troublingly, I think this light green color or whatever this is has higher infection. So that just misleads the eye. So I think picking the right color scales is really, really important. In 2013, Apple CEO Tim Cook got in some trouble, at least. Like, I'm a big fan of Apple products, but he was in 2013, he was showing cumulative iPhone sales over time. Can anyone guess why this may be misleading? So yes, it's another way to sort of mislead audiences using cumulative sort of sales figures. If you look at the year-on-year figures, they plateaued or even started declining after some time. So that was a way of sort of hiding. You just show all-time sales instead of quarterly sales. If we did show the real data, it would have showed a decline or at least a plateau in sales. Another way to mislead people. Here is seasonal snow forecasts in Buffalo in inches. So Milwaukee received 7.1 inches of snow. Buffalo received 101 inches. How is this a misleading visualization? Yes, I mean, it's definitely not proportional. And then are we supposed to look at the height? If it's the height, then this is not proportional. Are we looking at the area or the volume? Again, I mean, our eyes are really not good at really distinguishing like the length and the area and volume. Very easy to like mislead people. There's again a design effect, not the data effect. Can anyone guess why this is a wrong pie chart? Yes, the percentages actually do not add up to 100. And Edward Tufte, I think, really hates pie charts. And I think the reason that is that you're showing a two-dimensional effect when it's just one or just a few numbers. So it can easily be shown using like a bar chart or something like that. The moment you try to project these into areas, the human eye has trouble sort of visually calculating areas. So just show it as a line chart or a bar chart. What about this? Gun violence or gun deaths in Florida. It seems to go down over time. Why is that? Well, yes, it's an inverted axis. Zero starts from the top instead from the bottom. So it looks like it's going down when really it's sort of going up. You have to sort of rotate yourself around 180 degrees to sort of see the real effect. This one is a bit hard. Can I get everyone's thoughts on why maybe there's a good or a bad visualization? So this is showing you data over time, many hundreds of years, and looking at the biggest sort of epidemics in the world. So for example, this is some plague from the first centuries of the last millennium, the plague of Justinian, smallpox epidemics, Spanish flu, Ebola, and then this is the more recent COVID epidemics. These are lower and upper estimates. I'll just let that sit there, and then if I could have everyone's opinion on that. Yes, one thing that is again problematic is that you have compressed time into this fancy sort of this design effect again. Again, time is not on sort of equal spaces, if you will, because that dimension gets compressed as you go into the horizon. Another thing that's troubling is that you're using volume to show the percentage of the world population killed by the disease. So 200 million, and then you're showing it as like a percentage. So in terms of percentage, the Black Death kill was more sort of virulent, if you will, or more sort of worse than COVID. It's fine to show that percentage, but again, like calculating the volume is very difficult, and calculating the volume of a hairy or furry ball, that I think is quite problematic. That is really, really difficult. Again, it's probably just 2 or 3 numbers that needed to be shown. Maybe 2 line charts or bar charts would have been enough, but you have this fancy design effect. It looks appealing, but can easily sort of mislead people. Again, all my material, the slides, some code in R, other exercises, resources are on this particular GitHub repository. If you want to look at some of the mathematics behind dimensionality reduction and some of the derivations behind dimensionality reduction, then you can go through this particular PDF here. It's also available on this Open Science sort of repository. Lots of technical details, derivations, linear algebra that if you needed to sort of spruce up on, all that is here. But all the lecture videos, slides, and other resources are available on this GitHub repository. It's also in this flyer that I handed out. And yes, I'm happy to take any questions. And then I think I'll just quickly move on to, I think very, very quickly, this particular slide right here. So there's a climate science denier who is looking at data from satellites in low Earth orbit and seeing how these satellites in low Earth orbit are recording temperatures in sort of low Earth orbit, and these are plotted over time. There is a running sort of moving average that you see right here. I'll just let you read his tweet, and then I'll see why you think this makes sense or why this is problematic. Again, an easy way to sort of visualize this time series data. So yes, he is actually just sort of cherry picking one particular month in August of 2022, which happened to have the same temperature in 1998. There was a big increase in temperatures in 1998, but then you can see a trend of sort of increasing temperatures. But he's just cherry picking one particular month in the last sort of 30 years or 40 years, where the temperature just happened to be the same as in August 2022. Again, a very easy way to sort of lie and deceive with visualizations. There is an increasing trend which he just completely ignores. This particular visualization is quite interesting. It's showing you sort of a timeline of technology, starting from the wheel and fire. And it's showing you this fancy timeline. It's compressing a lot of time and using this spiral to sort of compress time into a small sort of area. And then it's unrolling a few of these timelines and saying, plotting the sort of invention of the wheel and the fire to modern sort of AI sort of technologies and sort of information technologies, and trying to make predictions for the future. I think there's an interesting way of sort of showing so much data. Again, there are more activities that you could sort of go through. I'll just point you to this particular GitHub repository. I'll also link it in the video. These lectures, videos, slides, and other resources and activities are all available on this GitHub repository. Thank you so much for listening. And again, as I said, if there's one thing that I would like all of you to take out of this class is show the effect of the data. Aim for a lie factor of 1. I think that's really, really important. And that's one principle that is really, I think, sacrosanct. Thank you so much for listening. And I hope you have a wonderful time plotting and visualizing this data, and wish you all the best. Thank you so much.